This is Changing Denver, the show about our city, how we make it, and how it makes us. I'm Paul Caroli. I thought you were a journalist. You completely overlooked the most important evidence. This podcast is absurd and biased, full of flawed logic, equivocation, circular reasoning, and intentional confusion. These are all comments I received after the most recent episode of our Rocky Flats series. The activists, or concerned citizens, as some requested I refer to them instead, are not happy with my conclusions about the safety of the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge. Most of their criticism I disagree with, but some has some merit, I admit. And I plan on releasing an episode in the next couple weeks with a proper rebuttal. In the meantime, think about what it meant for us to publish such a strong, fresh take. We stepped over the he said, she said, and I hope we push the conversation about Rocky Flats a little closer to the facts. That's worth a few bucks, right? If you value the contribution we've made to the discourse, or if you've just been enjoying the story, support us with a pledge at patreon.com/changingdenver. Give more than $3 per month, and you get access to all the transcripts of the Rocky Flats series. Pledge $10, and we'll give you the transcripts and thank you in the credits. Our campaign is ending at the end of August, and we haven't met our goal yet, so please, get on there and set up a pledge today. While you're setting up your pledge, please enjoy this final installment in our Rocky Flash fiction series. My friend Rebecca Aronauer wrote this story, and her partner Bryon Quick read it. It's called A Dramatic Death.
I miss her, but let's face it, Mom had a boring life and a boring death. She married the first guy who asked her out, had 5 kids with him, had 11 grandkids from them, and wore kitten heels to the end. 6 months ago, her great-granddaughter, my grandniece, had her christening on the other side of the country. Mom kept going to doctors until she heard what she wanted to hear, that she could fly. At this point, she was well below her lifetime goal weight of 111 pounds and needed a walker, even when she wasn't in kitten heels. Her hearing had never been great, but by then, it was like her ears were done listening. If I hadn't flown out with her, I doubt she would have heard the boarding call. But I did go with her. I was still her baby boy, her Andy-Mandy. I guess we both thought I'd stay 4, 16, 25, 39 forever. But I'm 60 now. Not a baby, not a young man, barely even a man. I'm the only one of her kids who stayed with her in Colorado. The other kids all left for bigger jobs, in bigger cities. That baby, Madison Marie, got the good water on her head, and at the luncheon afterwards, everyone, the grandkids, the kids, the in-laws, all waited for their turn to hug Mom, and she hugged them right back. It seems that final doctor was right. She was strong enough to fly. But 5 weeks after all those hugs, Mom died in her sleep, and who can say if the flight had anything to do with it? And so what if it had? To her, it wasn't worth being alive if she wasn't able to see her family. It's still sad to have her gone, even if she was 93. We went through her will last month, and I had thought, to be honest, I had planned that there would be more money. She had always paid for things, for lunches, for flights, for new sweaters for the kids. I was hoping she would pay for my retirement too, but I guess she had planned everything out. Like I said, she was pretty boring, because there was only enough left for the funeral and the lawyers handling her estate. My brothers and sisters can just be sad that she's gone. They all have boring lives and good livings. But I had wanted to climb Mount Everest, make sculptures, direct music videos. If you think those sound like disparate goals, well, Mom would agree with you. And instead of doing any of those things exactly, I climbed all the 14ers. I have a nice dog I consider an installation piece of happiness. I have great home videos of my 3 kids from my 2 ex-wives. The wives blame themselves for ever believing in me. The dog just loves. The kids, thank God, never really thought of me as anything more than Dad, which is probably the job I am best at. I was always on time to pick them up, and I still love them a lot. I worry about them too. They're each even worse with money than I am. Christina's a dancer, but really a Pilates instructor. Danny is trying to live off the grid up in Nederland, but goes down to Longmont about twice a week to shower at his mom's. The baby Lauren, well, Lauren took out a big loan to go to a college I had never heard of outside of Philadelphia. If I were to die right now, I don't know how they would even pay for the funeral. It's too late to become a CPA or whatever it is my oldest brother is doing, but I still have time for a Hail Mary. After Mom's disappointing will, I got a job as a security guard at Rocky Flats. I drink weak coffee and watch squiggly monitors all day. I figure, worst case scenario, I work somewhere beautiful. I go for a long walk on my break. I see kids on school trips who plan on being astronauts but have never taken a physics class. I'm hoping the scientists are wrong about Rocky Flats. Like anyone else, they're just using the available evidence to make an educated guess. I got a C in high school chemistry, but it seems impossible to me to ever really get rid of nuclear waste. And if I'm lucky, if my kids are lucky, Rocky Flats is still a hotbed of plutonium, and every breath I breathe there is like smoking 1,000 cigarettes. And the cancers will come all over my pancreas, my liver, my kidneys, my stomach, my intestines, my bones, in enough places that there's no doubt what happened. And the scientists and the state would owe a big apology to everyone, most of all to me, who sat there, exposed, day in and day out, who was denied a boring death, but in my dramatic one, could set my kids up for the rest of their lives.
I love that story. I love all 4 stories we've featured in this series. So thanks to Rebecca and Bryon for today's entry, but also to the other writers we featured, Sonia Christensen, Giles Hash, and Alexander Lumens. As you can see in your podcast player, this episode is not even half over. I have something else to share. Over the course of my work on this Rocky Flats series, I talked to dozens of people working on their own Rocky Flats-related projects. Many were concerned citizens, but there were also academics and writers, and even podcast producers. One of those projects stood out to me. It's a documentary film and multimedia project about the communities across the country that have been affected by the nuclear weapons industrial complex. The creators, Taylor Dunne and Eric Stewart, raised more than $10,000 on Kickstarter to fund the production back in 2017, and they're hard at work putting this thing together for a launch early next year. I don't agree with them about everything, but I found their insights extremely interesting, and I think you will too.
Hello?
Hi, is this Taylor?
Yep.
Hi, this is Paul again. How are you?
Good. And Eric is here too.
Hey, I'm right here.
Eric, hi.
Hey, how you doing?
It's good to finally connect with you two.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so to start, could the two of you introduce yourselves to me the way you'd want to be introduced on the radio?
Sure. My name's Taylor Dunne. I am a co-director of a feature film and multimedia project called Off Country. I'm also an assistant professor in the mass communications program at Adams State University.
And I'm Eric Stewart. I'm an artist, activist, and educator. I'm an assistant professor of photography at Adams State, and I'm co-producing, directing, editing, co-everything on Off Country with Taylor Dunne.
Gee, I know. I feel like I have to do it.
Co-everything. Cool. So tell me about Off Country. What is it?
So Off Country is a feature-length documentary and an oral history project that examines landscapes of nuclear weapons testing and also interviews community members and activists who've been working towards nuclear disarmament, nuclear guardianship, peace protesters, anti-war, kind of looking at that whole scheme of the nuclear military-industrial complex and the ways in which it's impacted the American Southwest.
So Off Country is looking at 3 sites. We think about it as interrogating 3 different landscapes. One is the site of the former Rocky Flats plant outside of Boulder, Colorado. The other site is the Trinity test site, which is where the first nuclear weapons test happened in 1945. And the third site is the Nevada test site, also known as the
Nevada National Security Site, I believe is what they call it now.
Yeah. That's one of those great generic names.
Yes, rebranding.
So how far along in the process are you?
We've almost finished principal photography, which we're going to finish in the next month, and then start editing over the summer. We started editing. A version of the project is currently on display at Breckenridge Creates, a gallery in Breckenridge, as an installation. But the film itself is about a year away from completion. So by August, we'll be editing, sound mixing, you name it.
Yeah. And we're also going to be producing a photo book with stills from the film and with other photographs that Eric has been taking that are related to this project. And we've been producing some audio documentaries, so taking a lot of the interviews that were either sometimes recutting some that we're using in the film, sometimes using interviews that didn't make it into the film, creating audio pieces. And we're also, the plan is, we're not quite there yet, but we're going to take every interview that we've done with anyone and put the entire interview online as an oral history project.
Oh, that's wonderful. That sounds like an excellent resource.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in, what I really like about your guys' project is that you're taking the Rocky Flats story and putting in this broader context. And there's a little bit of overlap of what I'm doing, but I love the perspective you all are taking, and I'd like to hear like some things that you've learned, like both about Rocky Flats in light of this broader context and about this broader context in light of Rocky Flats.
So Rocky Flats is really a case in point, and what we see happening at Rocky Flats, this rebranding of it as a wilderness refuge, wildlife refuge, this kind of disregard for history, and also disregard for the health and well-being of the people around the site is something that you see everywhere. You see it at the Nevada test site. You see it at the Trinity test site. You see it in countless places in the Navajo Nation in the Four Corners region where uranium mining occurred. And every aspect of the nuclear fuel chain is poisonous to the environment, poisonous to workers, and the attitude of the federal government and the various contractors involved is always absolutely callous. So we have one of the most potentially dangerous scientific innovations being run by the insensitive system of capitalism and insane bureaucracy. And there's been a lot of focus on Rocky Flats lately, which I think is great, but there hasn't been much focus on other people, like who've lived outside of White Sands, lived outside of Los Alamos, and lived at the Nevada test site. And what's so interesting about Boulder and Arvada and the history of Rocky Flats is the shutdown of Rocky Flats is oftentimes considered a success, right? We had these decades-long protests that manifested through this really amazing story, through John Litsky, the activists, et cetera, and Rocky Flats was closed. So that was, right, a success story in a certain light. But the communities in New Mexico and Nevada, they're completely different socioeconomic and racial systems at play. And so there haven't been those same success stories. And I don't want to say that Rocky Flats is a closed case, but the way that the public has been galvanized and the resources that people have in the Denver metro area completely surpass the resources and just that whole nexus that doesn't exist in New Mexico or Nevada. So we're really interested in the differences that play out in terms of how communities are able to act out and resist.
That's fascinating. This is something that I've wondered about with the Rocky Flats story. Why is it that these activists today are finding it? how is it that they're gaining strength? Why is it that this movement seems to be so successful in terms of the school boards banning field trips and things like that? And so what are those socioeconomic factors that differentiate Denver?
I mean, Boulder's affluent. I mean, there's a lot of money in Boulder. There's a lot of money in Denver. Colorado's becoming one of the wealthiest states in the nation, but also one of the poorest at doing school funding and any other kind of funding. New Mexico is
one of the poorest states in the nation. I think it's number 2.
Well, it ranks 48. I go from 1 to 60. And it's right behind, Mississippi. There's a much lower population. It's majority Hispanic and indigenous. And there's a lot of the way that people talk about New Mexico. And what's happening there now with the plans to build a new plutonium production plant, which will be a Rocky Flats 2.0, New Mexico is becoming the single source for the nuclear weapons and nuclear industry complex. And a lot of it has to do with the funding that's available there, the sort of low income, and mostly factors and people live much further apart. Like Denver, Boulder is a huge metro. Albuquerque's big, but it's not this huge metro like Denver and Boulder. Los Alamos and White Sands are all very disparate and thrown apart. And with Rocky Flats, you had this place 13 miles from like the hippie haven of Boulder in the 70s. So that combined with the affluence galvanized a huge group of people.
Yeah, and I also feel like with Rocky Flats, I mean, the Rocky Flats Truth Force and the movement that was involved to shut it down, to, bring awareness to it was huge. I mean, it was unprecedented. And I think that, just those people being part of that action, it's like they had this real camaraderie. They grew close. I think they're still in touch. I mean, it was really evident to me last weekend at the Rocky Flats Truth Force reunion was, people are talking about it in this really, kind of excited way. Yeah. And I think, they've been able to keep in touch and kind of reach out to other people. But I think another thing about New Mexico is that, jobs are really hard to come by. And I think this is something that is complicated, that we've talked to Tina Cordova of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders about this issue, because the people that are being, contaminated, or the people that are having an effect because of the, radiation and pollution and everything that's at like Los Alamos labs, tend to be the people on the real bottom of the work chain, like the janitorial staff, people who are working at, facilities that process waste. And, they're at like pretty low-level jobs, but also good jobs for the area. And they don't want to say anything because they don't want to lose their job because that's all they have.
And it's the same story with uranium mining in Utah and along the Colorado Plateau. And you see that same story in West Virginia, right, with resource extraction across the country. We privilege resource extraction over the health of people, and that's just one of the values we have in our economy. But I'm feeling sort of guilty because there are also many success stories at the Nevada test site, which is kind of a remarkable story in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like it's... when you're talking about contamination around these sites and health effects, do you feel like it's always appropriate to put them next to each other like this, even because their circumstances might be so different?
So to like compare White Sands to Rocky Flats?
Yeah, I don't know anything about White Sands specifically, but I imagine there are substantial differences in the exact type and amount of contamination from the site and health effects around it. Yeah,
I mean, you're exactly right. It's different. There are different levels of plutonium in the area around White Sands. There are different levels of things. And there's also different environmental processes that change how these contaminants move around. But I draw similarity not necessarily to the contamination or the methods of exposure, but I point out a similarity to the economic system that has built a system of environmental racism and also classist racism. And so I think it's more systematic, the contamination of land, than necessarily the specifics of how it's been contaminated.
And I think also for me, there's a similarity in these sites in the way in which the government has, in quotes, cleaned it up or not cleaned it up, or what they're doing with the site. Like at Rocky Flats, they're turning it into this, the Rocky Flats Wildlife Refuge. At the Trinity test site, it's part of White Sands. It's a missile range, but then there's also White Sands National Park. They're treating the Trinity test site like a park. Nevada test site is a little bit different because the Nevada test site is so huge, and it's also still very, very active. They're not doing above-ground nuclear testing anymore, but they're doing, who knows what they're doing over there. So.
And, they want to make this National Manhattan Project National Monument, which will go from like Hanford to the Trinity site over into, can't remember the Tennessee.
Savannah River?
Yeah.
No, not Savannah River. It's
wherever in the Tennessee Valley they're enriching.
Yeah, I'm like blanking on that, but.
Okay, I'm not familiar. That isn't. I hadn't heard about that. So that's a project in the works. I'm not familiar.
No, it's already happened. Like you can look on the National Parks website, and there's a Manhattan Project National Park, and it's Hanford, Trinity, and I can't think of the third one, and they want to expand it.
Yeah, and it's not an actual thing you can visit. It's more of a bureaucratic classification because the long game is to open it up to be more of a national monument.
Oh, that's so bizarre.
No, totally. And that's been in the works since the mid-'80s.
Wow, I'm going to have to look into that. That's a very curious little bureaucratic cranny, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
So what I'm interested beyond the question of health effects and the safety of the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge is this bigger question that you all are doing a great job of interrogating, as you might say, with our nuclear legacy. And I want to hear, I don't know if you're even comfortable sharing your opinions on something like this, but like, what do you think it would be an appropriate way to contend with that legacy or honor that legacy, or maybe something else?
Well, we always recommend the first thing that needs to happen is de-escalation. We have to de-escalate our nuclear relationships with other countries. Like, we're living in this huge environment of nuclear escalation. So, like, the first is, like, we have to end this legacy of competition with the Russians about our arsenals and our defense systems. Like, we absolutely, there's no progress that can be made unless we can de-escalate. Another thing, we look a lot at language. One of the things we talk about all the time is the language at the Bradbury Museum in Los Alamos, which of course is the educational arm of Los Alamos National Labs. But it's of course one-sided and all about the history of innovation involved in the Manhattan Project and their duty to uphold national security. And so, like, we're asking for, in terms of nuclear guardianship, aside from what we need to do to the landscape, which is to isolate it and clean it up as best as we can, instead of doing these half measures like making it a wildlife refuge so it doesn't have to be suitable for humans, right? The first thing to do is to stop using magical thinking, bureaucratic magical thinking about things that, like, plutonium is immobile, it doesn't move around, because that's just borne out not to be true. And it's really important to communicate and use language that's honest and transparent about the real hazards that exist. And I think that's not just true about the nuclear industry, but about the whole legacy of mining, right? Like, old lead mines, old gold mines, just really, instead of just saying, oh, look at the beautiful mountains that surround us, let's talk about and we can do it in a sensitive way, but the real toxic danger of unfettered capitalism and the inability to reconcile the damage we've done to the landscape, which really takes a huge shift in consciousness in how we talk about these issues.
And I think another thing I would like to see happen, I mean, you mentioned how do we honor, this legacy. I feel like we know who Oppenheimer is. We know who Groves is. I mean, we know the main historic canon of, the nuclear legacy, but we don't know the stories of the people who are living with this contamination. We don't know the stories of the activists. We don't know the people's history, the people that have been, that are a part of this legacy that are going unrecognized. And I feel like that's what our project is trying to do. And I would like to see, the Tularosa Basin downwinders. I'd like to see the people in New Mexico get recognized for the sacrifices that they've made as part of this nuclear legacy. I mean, that's what they are fighting for, is recognition.
Yeah.
I mean, they want to be part of the RECA Act. And I think that would be a way to, honor them.
Yeah, and like Oppenheimer and Groves.
Sorry, could I just jump in here? Taylor, you mentioned
sure.
the RECA Act. I'm not familiar with that. Can you explain what that is?
The Radiation Exposure Act?
Radiation Exposure Compensation Act for uranium workers in Utah and for downwinders. It was mostly for downwinders from the Nevada test site.
Yeah, so downwinders, there are a lot of downwinders too from the Nevada test site because they tested so many bombs there. But also Nevada is far less populated than New Mexico. But people who live downwind from the Nevada test site have received some compensation. They've recognized that, yes, radioactive fallout has affected the health of some communities. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like with the Rocky Flats workers, some of them who worked at the plant have been able to get some recognition, but some of them haven't. I mean, I'm sure that it's all these little loopholes and specific dates and times, and it's kind of like you either fit into it or you don't. But in New Mexico, and I think in New Mexico, people aren't recognized because it was only one test. It was only the Trinity test in 1945, and I think it's how much fallout could there be from one test? But there was a ton because it was for many, many reasons, and really contaminated a large area, and those people are still unrecognized.
Hmm. All right, let's wrap this up. I have one more question for you. Now, keep in mind that I'm probably not going to broadcast this for at least a couple of months, but I saw that you all are running a Kickstarter campaign. Is there anything you'd like to plug related to that?
Well, we actually are. We should probably edit that a little bit more. We're not doing a Kickstarter anymore. We did it in last November, but we are fiscally sponsored, so people can still make a tax-deductible donation to our project.
And where would they be able to do that?
So, on our website. Yep, on our website.
Which is?
Oh, it's www.off-country.com.
All right. Taylor, Eric, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Changing Denver is a proud member of the Denver Podcast Network. In the shadow of the mountains,
we speak.
Unclear Danger, the Colorado story of Rocky Flats, is being produced in partnership with the Colorado Independent and the Denver Public Library. If you want access to a transcript of Rebecca Aronauer's story and all the other episodes in our Rocky Flats series, past and future, you're going to have to pledge at least $3 per month at patreon.com/changingdenver. Even if you don't, maybe think about supporting the show with a pledge of an amount that makes sense for you. Again, that's www.patreon.com/changingdenver. Thanks to our super agent backers, Mark Maringer, Jason Peterson, Jeff Reisig, Joel Noble, Mark Groxwald, and one anonymous donor. Thanks also to Rebecca Aronauer and Brian Quick, Tina Griego and Susan Green at the Colorado Independent, Jenny LaPerriere at the Denver Public Library, and Megan Ariano. Our theme song is Minnow by Felix Fast Forward. The rest of the music for this episode and for all of Unclear Danger was provided by Ethernaut and Bisou de l'Enfant Sauvage. We have links to their work on our website, www.changingdenver.com. Unclear Danger will return soon. Until then, I'm your host, Paul Caroli.
Hello everybody, I'm JD Lopez, the host of Left Hand Right Brain. It's a free-flowing, wide-ranging conversation that I have with artists doing interesting and creative things here in Denver and beyond. We talk about their personal stories, break down their creative process, and what motivates them. Spoiler alert, it's mostly spite. We talk about all these things and more while kicking back, cracking wise, and always having a good time. You can find old episodes and everything you need to know at lefthandrightbrainpod.com.